Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Inept General, and welcome to some Total War Warhammer news on the new Regiments of Renown that have been announced for all the DLC races in Total War Warhammer 1. This is a great little announcement. It will all be for free, so don't worry about it. It's coming out on the 10th of August alongside the Norscan DLC. So even if you don't have the Norscan DLC, you haven't got it with the pre-order of Total War Warhammer 2, you haven't bought it by itself, it doesn't matter. If you have any of the races on this list, either of the Beastmen, Brettonia, which was free anyway, you should have it, Chaos, Norsca, and the Wood Elves, you will get the appropriate Regiments of Renown in this list for free. And it's just a way for Creative Assembly to kind of round off, really, Total War Warhammer 1, it seems like. So let's have a look and see what we got, shall we? Let's kick things off with the Beastmen. So the first unit the Beastmen were given are the Destroyers of the Drakwold. Now, these guys ended up being an Ungor Spearman unit with extra melee defense and poison attacks as well. That makes them a particularly handy unit for slowing down enemies. I think they could be helpful for doing that and really could act as a kind of general bodyguard. I mean, you could stick them up on the front line and they could do their work, but the poison aspect, like if any Pegasus Knights or anything came down, you've got the anti-large and you've got the poison, and with the extra melee defense, they can hold out long enough for another regiment to get there to help you fight off the Pegasus Knights. They can stop the Pegasus Knights from fleeing. They can allow your generals or your heroes to really dig into any cavalry or Pegasus Knights who have tried to snipe your general. So all in all, can be a pretty sort of utility player in any Beastman army. The next one is the Black Horns Ravagers. Now, the Black Horns are a unit of Beastmen who I think were mentioned in 7th edition, and these guys were led by Blackhorn, I think himself, and he decided to get his whole war herd absolutely blotto drunk, and they went rampaging around Carrick-Herne, just completely destroying the place. So really just guys, lads on a night out, really, is what the Blackhorn Ravagers are. In the game, they are just a gore herd with shields. They will have Stalk, which will be helpful, Vanguard Deploy, extra armor, and a charge bonus. So if you need an infantry unit to get in behind those lines to maybe back up some Gors or some other Vanguard units you have out there, then this is the unit for you. A particularly useful unit, I think. Now we are moving on to Korok's Man Rippers. Now, I was a little bit, they look pretty cool. They are Bestigors with halberds, essentially, which is a cool idea in the first place. But when you look at the lore and where they came from, these guys are Beastmen who Korok himself became slightly infamous because he would armor his Beastmen in the armor of old Brettonians. So it'd be cool to get a little bit of Brettonian garb on them a little bit, just to reinforce the lore aspect. But instead they're just kind of a greeny blue. But you know what? Beggars can't be choosers, I'll take it. It's an interesting aspect with Bestigors with halberds, and with the halberds they get the bonus versus large and the charge defense versus large as well. So that's all good. They lose the, I suppose they don't really have missile resistance in the first place. So just an interesting one. Could have been a little bit more interesting to begin with. Next up on the list, we have the Eye of Morsleb. Now, this is a Cygor with special abilities. They mentioned that he's throwing a big block of amber at the enemies, so rather than a rock, which, there we go, the Wood Elves amber, haha, I've got some, it's not yours anymore, and lobs that at them, but also has an ability called Warp Gaze. Now, what this will do is this is essentially a net of Amantok. It will freeze a unit in place. I think they said on the stream they freeze a unit in place for 16 seconds. So that seems to be about the limit of the ability, but 16 seconds is good enough. You can close down a unit in that amount of time. So I think a Cygor, I think this is almost a must bring. If you have a Cygor and you almost get a for free net of Amantok on him, depending on if you can use it more than once. Hopefully you can use it more than once, and I think that will be pretty great. If it's just on a cooldown, even added bonus there. Next up, we have the Sons of Goros. Now, for those of you who don't know, Goros is a legendary lord for the Beastmen. He didn't make it into the cut of the game. If you'd like to hear about Goros and his ways and his drunken, debauched, having sex with anything, has children all around the world kind of ways, do check out my Beastmen Missing Legendary Lords video, popping up in the top right hand corner now, or you'll find the link down in the description below. But these are his sons, a particularly sort of well-regarded regiment of Centaurs. In the game, they're armed with great weapons. They have this ability called Guardian, which is they can give physical resistance to any characters nearby. So if you have a Beast Lord mounted on something, presumably to keep up with these guys, charge them in with him, and they will give him extra physical resistance, and he'll be able to do even more damage when he's around them. They have extra armor compared to other Centaurs, and they have magic attacks, which can bypass physical resistance on the other end. It's great to see a little shout out to Goros. He's one of the Beast Lords I really wanted to see in the game, but we may see him later on down the road. But for now, we have his sons, who are rampaging around the battlefield with us as the Beastmen. Next up, we have the Butchers of Kalkengrad. Now, Kalkengrad, I actually may have mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it by name in my Ostland lore video. Again, guys, as usual, you can find a link to the Ostland lore video in the top right-hand corner or down in the description below. But these guys, one presumes, were running around with Ragash the Bloody. Now, for a long time, Ragash the Bloody was the main Beastman threat in the province of Ostland, and he was known for his absolute notoriety for carnage. And once he wiped out this entire village of Kalkengrad, what he'd done is, to save the meat that he killed for later, he started to store bodies in trees, and just so every tree around this village, the entire population had been slaughtered and hung up in these trees for a meal he could save for later on. So that was Ragash and these guys, but I assume these guys just were guys who went along with Ragash, and these are the Butchers of Kalkengrad, Minotaurs with shields. They cause terror, and they have regen. Minotaurs with regen. That is nuts! These guys, I just wish they were a great weapon variant, or the two-handed variant, the two-weapon-handed variant, just so they could do that much more damage. But it looks like these are Minotaurs. You can just sit and slug it out, pull them out for a bit, let them regen, charge them back in. Very handy unit indeed, I think, for the future of the Beastmen. So, following on from the Beastmen, let's move on to Brettonia, shall we? So, in Brettonia, let's kick things off with the Beast Slayers of Bastogne. Now, for those of you guys who have seen my Missing Legendary Lords of Brettonia, you will know that the Duke of Bastogne was a very well-renowned Beast Slayer in his own right, and it looks like they're kind of taking that aspect and sort of the idea of the special rules around the Duke of Bastogne and making a unit out of it. Now, it's a unit of foot squires, and much like the Bestigors before, they're taking a sword unit and really, well, an axe unit in the case of the Bestigors, and adding a halberd to it. Again, giving it bonus versus large and charge defense versus large as well. So that's just a nice little unit, just like a heavier anti-large unit for Brettonia there, which is quite interesting. Next up, we have the Holy Wardens of La Maisontal. Now, La Maisontal is a location, otherwise known as the Maisontal Abbey, where there was a huge battle in Warhammer lore between Kemmler, Krell, and the Skaven on one side versus Brettonia. Now, what they were trying to do was they were trying to get an artifact that was in the Abbey, but the Skaven had sort of said, oh, let's do a deal, Kemmler, and he was like, all right, as long as I can have the artifact. And they're like, oh, sure. But in the midst of the battle, the Skaven all kind of ran away, nicking the artifact on the way, leaving Kemmler a bit high and dry with his buddy Krell. But it looks like these guys were either at that battle or will be in that battle in the future tense. And they are battle pilgrims who dual wield instead of having a shield. So they'll lose their missile resistance, but instead they gain fire and magic attacks. And it looks like they have one of each attack on each arm, on each weapon. So that's interesting, just in terms of adding to their damage output as battle pilgrims. Next, we have the Companions of Quenelle, some upgraded questing knights with fire resistance, the Blessing of the Lady, And just essentially that's about it. So they get the Blessing of the Lady physical resistance buff off the cuff without needing it in campaign or anything like that, and that just makes them a bit hardier. Questing knights who are already kind of your melee cavalry just got ability to hang in there a little bit longer and do even more damage, which is a bonus, just an extra strong questing knight unit. And then we have Knights of the Lion-Hearted. The idea being that they're the bodyguards of Louis Leoncoeur, and they are seemingly a very powerful, I think they're paladins with lance, is what they're based on. Oh no, they're Knights of the Realm is what they're based on, sorry, apologies for that. And they cause fear, they encourage, which is something that increases the stamina, and they do magic attacks. And then we have the Defenders of the Fleur-de-Lis, the Knights Errant, and they have the ability Frenzy, just normal Knights Errant with Frenzy. And we have the Wardens of Montfort. They are mounted yeomen with poison attacks. Now, this is a particularly useful unit. If you imagine cavalry missiles who can target down cavalry units with poison, slowing them and allowing other things to catch them, perhaps even allowing them not to get away from your halberdiers. It's just very useful to have a unit that can move around the battlefield that quickly with poison attacks. So that's a good one to have on your side. And I think the mounted yeomen tend to do work. They did a lot of work in my Brettonian campaign, so to have some with poison attacks is even better. So after the Brettonians, let's move on to Chaos. Now, Chaos, I am super excited for. As many of you who aren't new to the channel may know, they are probably my favorite faction. Maybe not necessarily in the game, but just like in life. And they have got some pretty cool units coming to their side. The first one is the Mirror Guard. Now, look at these guys with their purple sort of Ode the Slanesh, like mohawks going on their helmets. I think these guys look absolutely fantastic. They are, of course, Sigvald's bodyguard. The idea that Prince Sigvald is so enamored with himself that he surrounds his personal bodyguard in such gleaming plate armor that no matter sort of where he's looking in the battle, he'll always have some view of himself doing his swishy swords moves or, just posing it up. So there's always a mirror around him, even in the midst of battle, for him to enjoy his own visage upon. So that's the idea of the Mirror Guard. Now, these guys are immune to psychology, they have increased movement speed, and have better melee stats than your typical Chaos Warriors, which is what they're based on. So after that, let's move on to the Demon Spew. Now, this is a bit of a horrific name, but these are essentially Forsaken, but Forsaken with poison damage. So that's pretty handy there. They're also, I think they mentioned in the stream, but wasn't in the notes. I think they mentioned got a buff to their melee defense. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think that's what they said. So that is the Forsaken Demon Spew. And then we have the Weird Spawn. Now, these guys sound horrifically dangerous, guys. These are Spawn, so they're unbreakable. They do armor sundering. So even if you have an armored attack, these Spawn don't care. They will break down your armor, and then that means they will be doing massive amounts of damage to you, and they have physical resistance. So these Spawn are hugely dangerous. They look great. I love the color scheme with the green. But these seem horrifically dangerous to be getting involved in. So that's the Weird Spawn. If they're just armor sundering, I'm just worried about that. That seems terrifying to face, particularly against Darwi or even other Chaos. And next up, we have the Swords of Chaos. Now, the Swords of Chaos, guys, there is a lot of lore about with them. They were essentially the Chaos Warriors, the best of the Chaos Warriors, who accompanied Archaon on his quest to find all the bits of equipment to become the Ever-Chosen. They've been with him for a very long time, and these guys are really the most elite of the elite of Chaos Warriors. So they're all mounted. They've based them on a unit of Chaos Knights. There's only 24 of them, but they have boosted stats, and they have what they refer to as Apocalyptic Charge, which is a map-wide buff to Chaos Army's speed and charge attacks, as well as Guardian, which is keeping the hero in it. So you have these guys rampaging around with Archaon himself. They will be doing a huge amount of damage. They have fire attacks as well. So Archaon, Fire Mage, these guys, fire attacks. A deadly combination if you put them together, I think. It's actually terrifying thinking about it. because Archaon will have the magic to weaken you against magic attacks. So if you're something like the Undead with all your regen and weakness to magic, and Archaon with his Swords of Chaos come charging into your flank, they will just begin to tear through a large portion of your entire army. And that will be a horrific sight to see, but there we go. You'd have to keep them together. And I think that's a hugely deadly partnership. So apart from the Swords of Chaos, we also have the Summoners of Rage. Now these are kind of your little mini-me Kolek Sun Eaters. They have a Chain Lightning bound spell. Now I'm not sure what Chain Lightning is, whether that's just a bolt from the sky and does a radius, or whether it's going to be like a wind spell. I can't remember rightly if that's a spell already in the Lore of Heavens. It probably is, but I just can't remember what it looked like in action. But they have that Chain Lightning spell bound to them. I think it's single use, they mentioned, which is a bit of a shame, and you only trigger it by being in melee combat long enough. So these guys have to be fighting before that Chain Lightning spell goes off. And I think they look okay. I'm not sure about the lightning effects. I think maybe they just could have done a bit around the eyes and maybe the tail or something. I think that would have done us properly. Doesn't need to be a big cloud of static lightning. But that is the Summoners of Rage. They don't have Guardians, so they don't necessarily need to go rampaging around with Kolek, unlike in the deadly combination with the Swords of Chaos and Archaon. Now, the next one, we're going to talk about some Hell Cannon. So the first Hell Cannon on this list is the Soul of Damnation. Now, this has the Soul Devour ability, which, now, I'm not exactly sure what they meant here. So in the notes they released, it says that the Soul Devour ability increases reload speed when the unit is damaged. So in an exchange of just, let's say, exchange of artillery at the beginning of a battle, if you actually try to focus down this Hell Cannon, its reload rate will just quicken. It will fire more and more at you, and you'll probably lose. You'll probably need maybe 2 units of cannon or something like that, maybe even 3 to actually take this thing down if you insist on firing upon it. Now, the way it was described in the stream was that it does increase reload speed if enemy units are near it. Now, those are 2 very different things. If it's damage, then you have to assume that was designed around the idea of an artillery exchange and just the fact it's a bad idea to exchange artillery with this Hell Cannon. Enough said. But if you just mean enemy units, that means you kind of want to move this Hell Cannon sort of right up to the front line, but not quite have it engaged, which is a very different thing and very, very different way you use it. So it'd be great to get clarification from them on that. But I'm going to go with the damage one on the assumption that it's the artillery exchange. But that seems a great little ability to have. If it takes damage, you can just keep firing quicker and quicker. Now, the one bad thing is with the Hell Cannons, a lot of people like to manually aim them because they can be absolutely devastating with manual aim, but you won't be able to benefit from the increased reload time if you're manually aiming them. So you actually maybe have to set this one on auto AI aiming and firing, and then you have to maybe bring another one along for your manual aiming, just so you get the full benefit out of this Hell Cannon. Now, I saved the Hell Cannon for last, guys, because from the campaign preview, stuff blocked it out the bonus you get for following the path of the Hound. Now, if this is just gibberish to you, you haven't seen that video, please do check it out in the top right hand corner or in the description below. But effectively, in the Norscan campaign, you have to go along the path of pleasing a certain god, and at the end of those paths, you get campaign bonuses. The one for the Hound, or Khorne, as it were, was blurred out. Now, it turns out that one is something called, I think it was Legion, or Legion Forged, something along those lines, which is another type of Hell Cannon. Now, this Hell Cannon unit is 4 Hell Cannons in one unit. Now, that is huge! So imagine you brought this guy along and that specialized unit. That is a lot of Hell Cannon. Although, having said that, you probably can't bring this unit because this is a Chaos unit, and the Legion one, is a Norscan unit. But that is the Norscan upgrade one, so just bearing in mind, while we're talking about Hell Cannons, the Norscans have one that is 4 Hell Cannons in one. Absolutely devastating, potentially. But, unfortunately, it wasn't a Bloodthirster, and it was not Valkyr the Bloody, unfortunately, but there we go. I'll take 4 Hell Cannons. That's a pretty good deal anyway. So moving on from Chaos, let's go to Norsca, kind of Chaos themed. Let's keep that going. We discussed the Legion Forged Hell Cannons, the battery of Hell Cannons that they are, but let's sort of start with some of the weaker Norscan stuff. Well, not weaker, let's kick things off with the Marauder Berserkers. Now, these guys are unbreakable and they cause fear. So, unlike other Marauder Berserkers, which might have their morale broken or break out of combat before they get their Berserker bonus, which is a bonus that you get, and if you last sort of 66 seconds in combat at 22-second stages, you get progressively better leadership, better physical resistance, and then in the third stage, you get better melee attack as well. So it's a thing that just means the longer you're fighting as Norsca, the better your troops are getting. So they have Unbreakable, which means they'll almost always, unless you can wipe them out in 66 seconds, they will always be there, keep fighting, and get that Berserker bonus, which is pretty cool, and they cause fear. So not only are they getting stronger, but they can cause the morale of their opposition to go down as well. So I think that is a pretty solid bonus for them there. So we also have the Icehorn Marauders. Now, these guys are simply Marauders who are immune to psychology and immune to vigor. So they won't get tired, and they will probably stay in combat longer than most, just putting on a solid performance in their fighting style, which is super, I think, yeah, a great thing. And it kind of gives a similar bonus to the ones those Berserkers got, in that it will have them in combat longer, and thus they probably will get their Rage bonus, which isn't as good as the Berserker bonus, but operates very much along the same way. So next up, let's have a look at some Hound, the Beasts of Tashnar. Now, Tashnar was a kind of sorcerer stroke beast speaker, I guess, in the Storms of Magic supplement, if I remember correctly. Now, what he did is he kind of like brought mammoths and to do his will and stuff like that, rather than just a pack of dogs. But here we have the Beasts of Tashnar, and they are the Norscan Warhounds, which have Frenzy, increased missile resistance, and a small bonus versus large. Now, this is good. Now, I don't think this makes them as good as the Ice Wolves, which is kind of an upgrade to these guys, but it makes them pretty solid, and it makes them a good companion to the sort of ride down missile units and take them out with that bonus versus large and that missile resistance. So missile cav units, these guys will be great at chasing them down. Plus Frenzy, they'll do a pretty quick job out of them. So next up, let's have a look at the Maws of Savagery. These are the Skin Wolves, Armored Skin Wool variant, and they have Vanguard. Now, that's very much similar to having a medium tier cavalry unit on Vanguard, so that will be particularly helpful when looking to take out enemy artillery or just attack from the rear on the enemy missiles or whatever have you. That's a pretty handy skill to have. Next, let's have a look at the Miststalkers with their little clouds of mist around them. Now, these are familiar warriors with Stalk and Vanguard and Terror. So these guys were said to be slow, but they're actually a bit quicker than your infantry. I think it's speed 45. But I think that makes them quicker than the infantry. I have to double check that, but I remember them saying they were slow, so I'm not sure if these guys got a speed buff as well, or what have you, but I'll have to have a check of the Thamir speed. But having Vanguard and Stalk means they can come in from a flank, come in from the rear, and cause a good amount of damage as well without being seen, having that Stalk ability. Very helpful, very hard-hitting unit, the Thamir Warriors, so that is a bag of fun right there. I do like their little cloud effect, it's pretty funny. And last but not least, for the Norscans, let's have a look at the Soul Crusher. So the Soul Crusher is a War Mammoth. Now, this has Enrage, which War Mammoths are hardy to begin with, so they've given it Strider, which means that terrain won't really slow it down, and they've given it Enrage, which is a temporary physical resistance. So if you're charging him out the front of your army, right into the sort of hellfire of cannons and gunners and quarrelers, then you put this on him as soon as he comes into range, and he will do a bit better than he would normally as he charges them down, taking all that fire for the rest of your army to come in, following up and sweep up what's left behind. So a handy little ability for a War Mammoth to have, indeed, considering how strong they appear to be anyway. So that about sums it up for Norsca. Next up, we have, last but by no means least, the Wood Elves. So let's kick things off with the Eternal Guard unit, the Winterheart Guards. Now, these guys are Eternal Guards with shields. They come from the realm of Winterheart, which is an area of Athel Loren, which is always in winter. they got unbreakable and charge defense against all, which is a pretty good bonus to have, and that unbreakable bonus as well. So they will definitely hold the line. What would have been interesting is because they come from Winterheart, give them that Norscan ability, that Frostbite ability that slows units down as well when they're in combat fighting with you. That would have been super interesting just because they come from a equally icy place. So next up, let's have a look at the Loek's Tricksters. Now, Loek is very much the god of the War Dancers. So these guys are War Dancers with Asari spears. And they have the Shroud ability, which essentially gives them Stalk when they want it. And they have Storm of Blades, which is giving them melee attack buffs, but taking away from their melee defense. So it's a different ability than the other War Dancers have. So they will give them Stalk and a speed increase, so they can really maneuver them around without the enemy really knowing where they are to some strategically very valuable positions. And the War Dancers can get work done as well. So very useful unit to have in the Wood Elf army. So next up we have the Wild Hunters of Kurnos. Now I'm not sure how lore accurate this is, but the idea being that these are the Wild Hunters that the one who becomes Orion every spring is selected from. But they've been given essentially the Guardian ability, so they give the physical resistance to a character near them, and I think that's the only bonus they got there. So next up we have the Hawk Eyes of Drakira. Now these guys are Way Watchers with Smoke Bomb, which is a great little ability we've seen before. Discourage when you shoot missiles at them as well. So that's a leadership sort of lowerer for enemy units when you're firing at them, which could be great if you're selectively aiming at units with already low morale. Just make them break and then move on to the next one, make them break. Very useful strategic ability there. Now, in terms of who Drakira is, she is the Queen of Vengeance for the Wood Elves, or the elves in general. The idea that she's the goddess of vengeance, the elven goddess of vengeance. So these guys are just a bit of some pissed off Way Watchers, which is pretty interesting. Now, next up we have the Wardens of Sifral. Now, these guys are following the tradition of this Regiments of Renown pack of kind of taking a unit that is usually a sort of melee axe or sword focused and giving them anti-large weaponry. So these are Wildwood Rangers who have been given a spear and a shield, given Vanguard, Stalk, and charge defense versus large. Now, if their stats look solid, so these guys can do some great damage, have Stalk, have that anti-large bonus. Really good against something one imagines like a Cygor hanging around at the back of a Beastmen army. Something like that. You can sneak up on him, charge him down before he has any opportunity to fire his bloody rocks at you, and take care of him that way. So particularly useful unit. And let's end things off with, I think it's the Firebark, but I think in the notes they've called them the Ironbark Elders. Now these are essentially treekin who are on fire. Now it's a bit silly, I know it's a bit silly, but they have fire attacks, fire resistance, and wildfire aura ability, which increases nearby units' resistance to fire. So that's particularly helpful for people in multiplayer who would use a lot of fire against treekin, against Durfu, against all these units that traditionally have a weakness to fire because they're just the Dryad. They're just trees, effectively. So, particularly handy unit. I think almost a must-bring if you are doing maybe a Durfu-focused build and a Treemen-focused build. So that's very interesting, and they should do a lot of handy work. But that's the last one, I believe, unless I'm mistaken, guys. It's a great little list, and I'm really looking forward to playing with each of them. I'm glad I haven't finished all my Total War Warhammer 1 campaigns yet, so we will have a chance to see these guys in some of our upcoming campaigns, and I can't wait to try them out, along with the Norscan DLC on the 10th. Hope you guys are looking forward to it too. And special thanks, as always, guys, to my patrons, Huli, Reese, Colin, Thomas, Mateus, Samuel, Matthews, David, Peter, Sign of the Emperor, Niblets, Calef, Nigel, and Hankster. Thanks, guys, for supporting me, and thank you all for watching, and I really hope to catch you guys all on the next one. Yeah, super excited for these Regiments of Renown. Can't wait to try them out. Alright, guys, bye.